So we're going to continue on with our subject matter, which is the obligatory knowledge. It's the essential knowledge that every accountable Muslim is obligated to know. That every accountable Muslim is not allowed to be ignorant of. And so we are in the section of purification. We already finished the section on the creed. So now we're in the section of purification and prayer. So we're talking about the integrals of wudu according to Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i radiyallahu anhu. So we got to number 3, which is the third integral. We're on page 47 for those who have the book. The third integral is to wash the hands, including the forearms, once up to and including the elbows, where the upper arm and forearm join, and what is on them. That is, even if the hair is thick, and even if there's nails, growth, cracks, and scabs on that skin. So you wash whatever is on your hands, whatever is on your organs, you wash. If you had, let's say, an extra piece of flesh growing out of your hand, you have to wash it. If you had a scab, you can wash over it. You don't have to remove it and then wash. If the hair of the arms is thick, then you make sure that the hair is wet. The fourth integral is to wet wipe the head or part of it once, even if the part is hairless. It is sufficient even if the part wiped on is one hair or part of a single hair within the boundary of the head, provided that the part of the hair wiped on does not lie outside the boundary of the head. If it were to be extended to the side where it normally falls, or else this will not suffice. So, the Muslim, he has the correct belief in God and His Messenger. He knows that this universe has a beginning because he sees the universe around him change. So the Muslim observes what happens around him, and he looks at himself. He says, I used to be nothing, and then I became something. I used to be non-existent, and then I began to exist. So I didn't make myself exist. I didn't make myself have the features that I have. I didn't make myself have the skin color that I have. I didn't make myself be born in the time or the day or the month or the year that I was born in. So that Muslim, he knows that he didn't make himself, and he sees everything around him, and he sees that those things are similar to him, even though they might not be identical, but they're similar. In what sense? In the sense that since I know about myself that I didn't put myself here, I know about the sun that it didn't put itself here. I know about the moon that it didn't put itself here. I know about this whole entire universe that it didn't make itself exist. Just like I am not the one who put myself into existence, also everything else did not, and everything else around me, since it's similar to I am, did not make itself exist. So that's the evidence of the mind that God exists. This is how we establish and prove that God exists. And we say that the creator of the universe is the only one without a beginning, and everything else has a beginning. How do we know that everything else has a beginning? Because we see it change. So we did not have to be physically present when something began to exist in order for us to be sure that it had a beginning. Why? How are we sure that something had a beginning? Because we see it change. And the change in and of itself is a beginning and an end. So we see the universe change, and we see ourselves change, and we see the sun change, and we see the moon change. And we see the seasons change, and we see the environment change, and we see inanimate objects change. We see things go from good to bad, bad to worse. We see things go from new to old. We see things, or from new to used, we see things change. This is a fact of the matter. So once we see that something changes, we know that it has a beginning. And when that thing has a beginning, we know that it is not the Creator. So anything that's like us, anything that is a human, anything that has a body, anything that has a shape, anything that has a size, anything that has a color, anything that changes locations, moves up and down, anything that is attributed with stillness, it is a creation, and therefore it does not deserve to be worshipped. So if someone worships a creation, we know that what they're worshiping is not valid to be worshipped, because it did not create anything, it did not make us exist. So it's not like how some people say, where they claim that certain creations, and they have no proof, but they claim that certain creations were eternal. And this is not the case. The case is that only the Creator has no beginning, because He's the only one that deserves to be worshipped. He's the only one that is attributed without having a beginning. He's attributed with no beginning, and everything else has a beginning. So alhamdulillah that we worship the Creator only, and we do not worship creation. So that Creator of the universe, He sent thousands and thousands of prophets to this earth, and all of them, they came with the same message, to worship the Creator only. No one is God except the Creator. No one deserves to be worshipped except the Creator. So that Creator, He sent those prophets. Why did He send them? As a mercy and as a guide for the people. Because how else would the people know how to live? Now we can use our mind to know that this universe has a beginning, that this universe changes, that it needs a Creator. We can use our mind for that. But we cannot use our mind to know, for example, what is the right way to live, and what is right and what is wrong, and what is good and what is bad, and what is permissible and what is not permissible. We cannot use our mind to get to this conclusion. So that's the difference between us and the non-Muslims, is that we follow what God revealed. We follow the laws that God revealed. And so what God judged to be forbidden is what we judge to be forbidden. And what God judged to be obligatory is what we judge to be obligatory. And what God judged to be praised is what we judge to be praised. And these are the rules that we go by. We don't go by any other rules. And so, when it comes to our obligations, we have to follow the rules and the laws that God revealed. And so this is what we're doing right now, is that this is why it's important to have this knowledge of knowing how to do the ablution, knowing how to do the purification, knowing how to do the acts of worship, because God revealed it and we have to follow it. The fifth integral is to wash the feet and what is on them, that is, hair, nails, growths, and cracks, once including the ankles, which are the protruding bones below the shin. This is true if one is not wearing a footgear, khuf, where in this case one is obligated to either wash the feet or to wet wipe the footgear, when the conditions of wet wiping the foot gear are fulfilled. So when you have the khuf, then you can wet wipe on it and you don't have to wash the feet. Now I was going to mention the conditions for that. These conditions are for the foot gear to be pure, to cover the whole foot including the ankles, and the foot gear to withstand walking in them without additional footwear for the necessary errands normally performed by a traveler when getting off to rest and packing up to leave. It is also a condition that the foot gear is worn when one is in the state of complete purification and that they prevent water from going through to the feet. So this is the conditions for using the foot gear. So number one is that it has to be pure, made out of pure material. That means not najis. Number two, that it has to cover the whole foot, including the ankles. Number three, that it has to withstand walking to run the errands of, if you're traveling, let's say, on a camel and you're pitching a tent and you're stopping to rest and you're going to pitch the tent, you're going to gather firewood. So to run those errands that you need for that, you need to be able to walk on the foot gear without it getting ripped or torn. And number four, that you put it on during a state of complete purification. So after you finish making the wudu, then you put it on. And the fifth is for that foot gear to be, if you want to call it, waterproof. What does that mean, waterproof? Yani, it means that if you were to pour water on it, the water would not go through. The six integrals, to perform these integrals according to the aforementioned order, that is, by starting with washing the face accompanied with the valid intention, then washing the hands and forearms, then wet wiping the head, and then washing the feet. So what does that tell us? That tells us that according to Al-Imam Shafi'i, if you were to start with your feet and then do your face and then the hands and then the head, this would not be a valid wudu. You would have to do it in order. So that means if let's say 4 people were washing you at the same time, like they wash the parts of wudu at the same time, this wudu would not be valid. So say you had one person washing your face, one person on each arm, one person on each foot. At the same time they washed those organs, they all simultaneously washed it, it would not be valid. Because you have to follow the order. However, if you did, let's say, submerge yourself in water, like let's say you're in the ocean or in the river or in a lake, and you submerge yourself with water, and you intended to make wudu, then you would be on wudu. Because you can technically assume that the order was fulfilled. In the case where the people are gathered together, washing your organs at the same time, and here it's actually an order is not taking place. But when you submerge yourself in the water, there is a technical order taking place, because one could be wet and then the other one after that one gets wet, etc. So it's not all at the same time. The sixth integral is to perform these integrals according to the aforementioned order. We mentioned that. Now going to the invalidators of wudu. Wudu is invalidated by 4 matters, and this is according to Al-Imam Shafi'i. The emission of anything, be it customary or not, a tangible substance or gas from the eliminatory outlets, which are the anus, vulva, and penis, with the exception of mani, which is fluid that is usually discharged by males and females during orgasm. That is, if one's own mani is emitted, it does not invalidate one's wudu, according to Imam al-Shafi'i. May Allah raise his rank. So according to Imam al-Shafi'i, when the mani exits, it doesn't break the wudu. However, it does make the ghusl an obligation. So anything that comes out of the eliminatory outlets, other than the mani, it does break the wudu. So like urine, feces, blood, worms, and anything that comes out of the person from his urethra or from his anus, and for the woman, the additional vaginal opening, and where the baby comes from. So a discharge, whether it's normal or not, whether it's customary or not, whether it's something that the person experiences on a daily basis or not, as long as it's not mani and it comes out of you, out of those places, it breaks the wudu. The second invalidator is touching the penis or vulva of a human. Therefore, touching that of an animal does not invalidate one's wudu. The invalidator is touching a male's penis or touching the line of contact between the two folds of the labia minora adjacent to the vagina and urethra with the inside part of the bare hand, or touching the rim of a human's anus. That is, the edges of the outlet that touch when closed, not the mere touching of the buttocks with the inside part of the bare hand. The inside part of the hands is defined as the area concealed when placing one palm on the other while applying a slight pressure with the fingers spread apart. Therefore, touching the aforementioned with the back of the hand does not invalidate the wudu. Also, for the touching to invalidate wudu, it must be without a barrier. Thus, if there was a barrier, wudu is not invalidated. The third invalidator is for a male who has attained an age where he is normally desired to touch the skin of a marriageable female who attained an age at which she is normally desired. Therefore, if a young boy who is not normally desired touches the skin of a young girl who is not normally desired, or the skin of a woman, or if a man touches the skin of a young girl who is not normally desired, or touches the skin of a woman with a barrier, or if he touches other than her skin, such as her hair, his wudu is not invalidated. But if they are not, let's say, married, or if they're not halal for each other, even though by touching her hair the wudu is not invalidated, but it's forbidden, and if it was without a barrier. The fourth invalidator is losing one's consciousness or sanity by insanity, epilepsy, intoxication, or sleeping, except if one is sleeping with one's buttocks firmly seated, be it on the floor or an animal's back or other than that. So if you fall asleep sitting down in a way that no air would escape, no gas would escape, and you wake up in that position, then your wudu is considered to be intact, as long as nothing else that breaks the wudu occurred while you were sleeping. So if the person, let's say, they slept like that, they slept in a way that their buttocks are firmly planted, and then they woke up, let's say, on their side, their wudu is invalid. So the person needs to pay attention to that case. Now moving on to cleaning oneself after urinating and defecating. So it is part of it is an integral part of Islam for the Muslim to be clean, for the Muslim to be physically clean, and for the Muslim to be spiritually clean. So among that physical cleanliness is that we are obligated to clean ourselves after we use the bathroom. Many people, they don't clean themselves after using the bathroom. Many non-Muslims, they do not clean themselves after using the bathroom. They, some of them, they just pull their pants up right away without anything. That's of course on the extreme side. And some of them, they don't clean themselves sufficiently. But we can see among the things that show that Islam is the true religion is the fact that we are obligated to clean ourselves after we use the bathroom. And it's something that is part of our religion, that we clean ourselves in a certain way after using the bathroom. The author said, so this is the chapter of istinja. Istinja is obligatory when one wants to perform prayer after the emission of any moist substance which soils the outlet from any of the eliminatory outlets, that is, the penis, vulva, and anus. This is the case whether the emitted substance is usual, such as urine, or not, such as blood. The emission of a non-moist substance does not make istinja obligatory to perform, since it does not soil the outlet. Istinja is an obligation for all moist substances with the exception of mani. Therefore, istinja is not obligatory if mani is emitted because it is pure, not najis. So now we're talking about cleaning oneself after urinating and defecating. But it's not specific to just that. Any moist substance that comes out of the eliminatory outlets, it makes it that we're obligated to make istinja, and to clean ourselves in that specific way. And the difference between that and the breaking of the wudu is that in the case of istinja, if the substance is not moist, then you're not obligated to clean yourself in that specific way. But in the case of breaking the wudu, even if it's not moist, even if what comes out of you is not moist, with the exception of mani, it breaks the wudu. So, who can give an example of something that breaks your wudu, and in terms of something exiting from the eliminatory outlets, but that you're not obligated to make istinja for? The scholars of jurisprudence, they have sometimes in the books, they have what they call riddles in the Islamic law. And they are actually kind of like, you have to be very smart to figure it out. But this one's not like that. This is something similar. And there's these questions like, there's a thing, and this thing, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, and related to the judgment. So this is something similar. Something that breaks your wudu in terms of something exiting from the eliminatory outlets, that you're not obligated to make istinja for it. Something that comes out of you that breaks your wudu, but you don't have to make istinja for it. Passing gas. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, it was an easy one. That's why I said it wasn't like a riddle, like those riddles that the scholars do. Alhamdulillah. If I come across one, next time inshallah I'll mention. طيب. So how do we do this cleaning? How do we clean ourselves? Istinja is performed by using either pure and purifying tahur water, by rinsing the soiled area until it becomes pure, which is achieved by removing the najis filth entity and its attributes, or by wiping the soiled area 3 times, not less or more than 3 times, if the area did not become pure with 3 wipes, even if the traces that can only be removed with water or small pieces of dry clay remain. So basically there's 2 methods, or 2 things that you can use to make istinja. Either you just use water, which is, if you're only going to choose one out of the 2 methods, then using water is the best way. Because using water is actually what purifies. But you still are allowed to, even if you have water, to use something like tissue. What does that mean, something like tissue? It means something that is going to come, but something that is solid, uprooting, not respectable, pure. So like a rock or like a tissue, but not a wet tissue, or not like a wet wipe. The wet wipe would not be valid for istinja because it's not dry. It has to be dry. But even if you do have water, you can still only use toilet paper, for example. But if you were going to just use one, the best way is to use the water, to suffice with the water. But even though if you have water and you have toilet paper, you can still use toilet paper only. So that's what he meant when he said, or by wiping the soiled area 3 times or more, even if the traces remain. So what does that mean? That means that if you do use only, let's say, toilet paper, the way that the minimum method, in order for it to be considered that you made proper istinja, is to wipe the soiled area no less than 3 times. And if that's enough for the area to be clean, then you can stop at 3. But if it requires more than 3, you keep on going until it's clean. But if it were to be cleaned with 1 wipe, you still have to wipe 2 more times. So for the wiping, it's not enough to do it just once, even if it gets cleaned by that, which is, I would say, not common. But even if it was, you still have to wipe it 2 more times because the minimum amount of times is 3. And so you can wipe and not use water, even though there remains, when you wipe, traces that can only be removed with water or small pieces of clay. Yani, it just means that the person, he won't be able to completely wipe it, let's say, like how it would get with water or with the small pieces of clay. Now we're going to talk about the thing that can be used for wiping, the conditions that it has to meet. The wiping is done with an uprooting object. So that means, what does it mean, uprooting? It means that it takes off the bulk of the thing that is soiling the area. And it meaning not something that's going to make it spread. Therefore, what is not uprooting, such as glass, bamboo, or loose sand, will not be inadequate. Will not be adequate. So glass, right? Let's say somebody had a piece of glass. Isn't the surface of the glass smooth? If you were to wipe that glass or wipe something with that glass, what would happen? And it would spread. It wouldn't become uprooted. Same thing with bamboo. Bamboo, if you try to wipe something with bamboo, it's only going to spread. It's not going to wipe it off. And loose sand, obviously, will not wipe anything off. So if a person had some loose sand, that wouldn't be sufficient for istinja. Then the author said, it also needs to be pure, therefore it is not enough to use solid dry stool of an animal or a stone that is contaminated with something najis. So the thing itself has to be pure. So that means you cannot use the dried feces of an animal. In some places in the world, they do use some, if you want to call it, bricks that are like mud mixed together with cow dung or horse dung or horse or cow. Maybe even sheep too, but the sheep, it's like little pellets when it comes out. But anyway, they take that and they take some of the mud and they like pack it together, and you can make like bricks out of it, and then that's what they will build their house or their hut or their house from. Nah. So basically, when it becomes hard, it's exactly like a rock. So if you were in the wild and you wanted to make a istinja, you cannot use that, even though it's literally like a rock and it's hard as a rock, but because it is feces and it's not in itself pure, it cannot be used for istinja. Or something that is actually a rock, a stone, but it has some filth on it already, so you can't use that same spot. So if that rock, let's say, already has filth on it, you can't use it to make istinja. It won't be valid. It also needs to be solid, so neither a liquid substance other than water, such as rose water, nor a moist substance such as a wet piece of cloth will be sufficient. Meaning that it will not be counted that the person made istinja. If he uses a wet wipe, for example, it will not be counted that he made istinja. So if he cleaned himself with a wet wipe, and then he went to supposedly go pray, his prayer would be invalid. It also needs to be unrespectable, so it is not permissible, nor is it sufficient to perform istinja with what is religiously respectable, such as Islamic books or what is sought as food by humans, like bread and what is similar. So we say it has to be unrespectable, and it means unrespectable Islamically. So what's something that's unrespectable? Like a rock, like a leaf, like a dried leaf, and a leaf that fulfills all the conditions. But what's an example of something respectable? Like a piece of paper from a book of Islamic knowledge. Na'udhu billah. So the person who uses a piece of paper that is, let's say they tear a book from a book of Islamic law, a book of Islamic knowledge. They tear a page off of it and they use it to make istinja, knowingly they blaspheme. Na'udhu billah. And also the istinja would not be valid. So if they do it, the istinja itself would not be valid, meaning they're still obligated to make the istinja. And if they don't do it, and their prayer won't be valid. And if they try to do the prayer without making istinja, it won't be valid. Another thing that's considered to be respectable is like human food. Any food that is mostly consumed by humans, like bread. So you're thinking to yourself, how could someone make istinja with bread? And for example, like when I first started learning, I would think how could somebody make istinja with bread? Because I'm thinking about sliced bread. But if somebody were to use pita bread, then I could see how that would, and they might do that with pita bread, or like the bread, the flat bread, the khubz that's round and you open it up. But it's not permissible to do that, and it's invalid. The istinja would be invalid. If all four conditions are met in an object, such as a stone or paper, Istinja may be performed in this way, even if water is present, provided the moist najas filth, that is the emitted substance, does not move or become dry. Now, like we said, even if you have water and you're able to use water, you can still choose to use toilet paper or the stone. You can still choose to do that. You don't have to use the water. But there are conditions in order for that to be valid. Now, in order for using the toilet paper by itself to be valid. So the first condition that we mentioned is that the thing that came out of you does not move or become dry. So subhanAllah, some people, they like to sit on the toilet for a long time. Na'udhu billah. It is, now the scholars of Islam, they warned against going or spending a lot of unnecessary time in the bathroom. That the one who spends a lot of unnecessary time in the bathroom, he will get affected in his mind, and he will get affected by the jinn, and he will get whispers, and is dispraised. Because the bathroom is the place where the jinn, they like filth, and they like to be in the bathroom. So when you use the bathroom, you should not spend unnecessary time in there. So in the past, what did people used to do? Before the iPhones, what did the people used to do? They used to take the newspaper, they used to have magazines, they used to have novels, they used to have like a magazine rack, na'udhu billah. And as I've heard in some people, or in some lessons, that some people go in there, they take the newspaper, and they take the cup of, like a shot of Turkish coffee in there, all together. So that's not what should be done. It's not like a place of relaxation and resting. You just get in and do what you need to do and get out. So that is the what the scholars said. And so anyways, if somebody does sit on the toilet a long enough time to where the stuff that came out of them becomes dry, then what happens? They cannot only use the toilet paper, they have to use the water. So they would be obligated to use the water, and it would not be sufficient for them to only use the toilet paper. If the emitted substance moves from where it originally settled to a separate spot, then cleaning with water is required for the separated substance. So if the thing that came out of the person, and it settled in a certain spot, and then it moved, that spot that it moved to has to be washed with water. Also, if the emitted substance that moved from where it first settled remained coalescent, then water is required for its removal. On the other hand, if the emitted substance did not become separated, nor did it move from where it reached and initially settled, nor did urine or similar waste spread past the glands of the penis of a man, or the orifice of the vagina of a woman where the penis enters, nor did feces spread past the natal cleft, that is the line of contact between the buttocks when standing, then using stone or the like is sufficient. If the emitted substance spread beyond these areas or dries, then water must be used. So, in the case of the spreading, when the substance that comes out of you, when it settles in a place, and it's separated from what it originally came from, then you only have to wash with water that spot that it it moved from where it settled and is separated from what it came from. In the case when it's connected to what it came from, then the whole area must be washed with water. In the case of spreading, so let's say that in the case of the man, the urine spread beyond what is called the head of the penis. So it went from the head of the penis to the shaft. So now water must be used. And it's not sufficient to use the tissue, for example, by itself. For the woman, if it spread from her urethra to the vaginal opening, and where the baby comes out of, then she has to use water. She cannot just use the tissue. And it basically, for the woman for sure, and most of the time, she has to use the water. Most of the time. Oftentimes, she has to use the water. That's the case for the woman. As for the man, the same rule applies. If the urine were to spread past the tip of the penis, the head of the penis, then he has to use water. And for the feces, if they spread to the place where the line of contact occurs between the buttocks when standing, so if the feces spreads out to there, then you have to use water. So, as you know, like when the person is standing up, there's a certain, any part of the buttocks that is covered. When the person squats, then there's a certain part of the buttocks that becomes exposed. If the feces reaches to the part of the buttocks that can be seen when you're standing up, then that makes it that you have to use water. And the tissue would not be sufficient. Now, what is the best form or the best way to perform istinja? The best way to perform the istinja is by first using something like the tissue, and that tissue, then they wipe until they remove the entity, and then they use water. That's the most perfect way. Any questions about istinja before moving on?
Can you start with wet wipes and finish with dry tissue?
The issue with the wet wipes is that they spread the najasa. So it's not permissible to spread najasa. But in terms of, let's say, if they did use the wet wipes first and then they used the water, then of course the istinja would occur. So in terms of validity, if they did use the wet wipes and then they did use water, and because they would have to at that point, then the istinja would happen. But it's just a part of spreading the najasa that would be the issue. So we'll mention the obligatory ghusl, which is short. So among the conditions for the validity of the prayer is the purification from major ritual impurity, al-hadath al-akbar. This is done by performing the obligatory bath, ghusl, or dry purification, tayammum, when one is unable to perform the ghusl. There are 5 occurrences which render the ghusl an obligation. 2 of these 5 occurrences apply to both men and women. This is talking about the major ritual impurity, or al-hadath al-akbar. in terms of what makes something, or something that makes the ghusl obligatory. And so the first thing is the emission of the person's own mani. What is meant by emission here is for mani to reach the outside of a man's penis, the outside of a virgin's vulva, or the part of a non-virgin woman's vulva that is apparent when she squats on her feet to relieve herself. If the mani does not reach the above-mentioned points, then it does not necessitate the obligatory bath. So here, this is an explicit mention of this case, yani, that if the mani actually doesn't come out of you, that if it actually doesn't reach those points, then you're not obligated to make ghusl. And for the man, it's clear, for it to reach the outside of the man's penis. For the virgin, it reaches to outside of her vulva, and the outside of the labia minora, outside of the apparent part of the vaginal opening. And for the non-virgin, if the mani reaches to the part that becomes apparent when she squats, then she has to make ghusl. Less than the virgin. The virgin has to come out all the way, and for the non-virgin, it only has to make it to the point where when she squats to relieve herself, the part that is apparent, that is where if the mani reaches there, then she has to make the ghusl. If the mani does not reach the above-mentioned points, then it does not necessitate the obligatory bath. So that means it's possible that someone would have what is called the qada'u shahwa, for the climax to occur, but the ghusl would not be an obligation, because the mani didn't reach those points. And if it was, and then we're going to mention the other things, but one of them is the emission of mani. So we're just talking about the emission of mani by itself. If it didn't reach those points, then the ghusl is not obligatory. Mani is known by its signs. It exits in spurts, gushing out one spurt after another. It exits with pleasure, and it smells like dough when wet and like egg white when dry. When any of these three signs is present, the emitted is judged as mani. So these three signs are for us to judge that thing that came out, for us to judge it as mani. So if any of those three signs are present, then we judge it as mani. And if it came out in spurts, then we judge it as mani. And that's the Arabic term for it, mani. In the scientific English, they say semen for the male. For the female, there is no scientific equivalent. But the woman has the same fluid. So that's why we use the term mani, so that it could just be understood. So sometimes, for example, the person would have, let's say, something come out of him, but they don't know how to judge it. So what do they do? They put it to the test. One of these three signs. If one of those three signs occurred, then they judge that thing that came out of them as mani. And it is not a condition for all three signs to occur. So sometimes, for example, you wake up and there'll be wetness and you're not sure how to judge, you put it to the test. Those three, if you try to determine one of those three signs. Now in the case where if you can't tell what it is, then you have the option to either judge it, and you decide. You either judge it as mani, and then you apply the rule that comes with that, or you don't judge it as mani, and you just make istinja. The second occurrence that requires the ghusl is sexual intercourse, which is defined as inserting the glands of the penis or its equivalent size-wise for a person who does not have it in a vagina or an anus, even if no ejaculation occurs. So this is the definition of sexual intercourse. So it's basically defined as inserting the head of the penis in a vagina or an anus, even if no ejaculation occurs. Now all the stuff in between is just referring to if a person doesn't have that. So the normal case is that the person, they have the organ intact, a shaft with the head of the penis. So if they insert that part, the head of the penis, into a vagina or an anus, then that's called sexual intercourse. Just by doing that, the ghusl becomes obligatory. Now what if someone, let's say, they were born without it, they have a shaft, but they don't have the head of the penis? How is it defined as sexual intercourse for them? And if that same amount of the shaft that would be equal to the head of the penis was inserted into a vagina or an anus, then that would be called sexual intercourse. But less than that, it's not called sexual intercourse. So less than that, so let's say the person did have the organ complete, and they inserted a part of the head of the penis into a vagina or an anus, it would not be judged as sexual intercourse, and therefore they would not have to make ghusl. And if that person was not halal for them, they would not be charged with the crime of fornication, and the religious penalty would not be enacted on them. So these definitions, they do serve a purpose. So even if no ejaculation occurs, just by the intercourse occurring, that makes the ghusl an obligation. The 3 occurrences are specific to women. So the first 2, the emission of mani and sexual intercourse, they happen to both men and women. But these last 3 that we're going to mention are specific to women only. The first is menses, al-hayd, which is the blood emitted from the uterus of a woman, neither due to illness nor due to giving birth. So how we define the menstruation of the woman is that way. The blood that comes out of her womb that is not due to sickness or giving birth. And it's the natural process that the woman has. And it's mentioned that this is something that began amongst the Muslim women of the children of Israel. That it wasn't always the case, that this happened. The minimum duration of menses is 1 day and 1 night, and the maximum duration is 15 days. The termination of menses necessitates the obligatory bath. The second occurrence is postpartum bleeding and nifas, which is the blood emitted from the uterus of a woman after giving birth. And so, any woman who's given birth, and it's known. This is a known thing. And sometimes the doctors, they're surprised when the Muslim women are so educated about this matter. They're like, oh, how'd you know about that? Because it's our deen. The minimum duration of postpartum bleeding is a moment, and the maximum duration is 60 days. The termination of postpartum bleeding necessitates the obligatory bath. So once her postpartum bleeding ends, so it's treated just like menstruation, in the sense that once the bleeding stops, then in order for her to pray, in order for her to do the things that she could do while she's not bleeding, she has to make an obligatory ghusl. The third occurrence is childbirth, al-wilada, even if no wetness accompanies the birth of the child. This concludes the 5 occurrences that necessitate the obligatory bath. So alhamdulillah, those are the 5 things that make the obligatory bath an obligation. We'll talk about the integrals of the obligatory bath and some other details, inshallah, next week. Are there any questions?
Can you do ghusl in the ocean?
Yes. So that's a very good question as well. So you can make ghusl and with any pure and purifying water. So even if let's say you just put any little amounts of water in your hand at a time, and then you rub your whole entire body with it. And so you took some water, you have like a little puddle of water in your hand, and then you put it on yourself and you rubbed it, and then you kept doing that little by little until your whole entire body was wet. And we're going to talk about the integrals, inshallah, next week. That's enough. But also, you can jump into a body of water, like a lake or a river or an ocean, and that would be enough. And as long as the whole entire body is washed by the water. You can also do it in a swimming pool. However, you just have to make sure that the swimming pool has not been mixed together with a large amount of bleach to the extent where it changes the entire smell of the water. Meaning that now the water, the smell of it has been changed from its natural state to the smell of bleach. Which, it's not, there are some pools that they don't have that the water has not been changed by the bleach. No. Even in making ghusl, it's recommended for not a lot of water to be used. If I recall correctly, the Prophet ﷺ used to make ghusl with 6 mudds. The mudd is when you put your hands together like this and you fill it with water. So the amount of water that you can fit in your hands cupped together, that's 1 mudd. The Prophet ﷺ made ghusl with 6 mudds. And he made wudu with 1. And with the recommended parts of the wudu as well, not just the minimum. So it's doable.